If you've only watched the Tsukimichi anime, you probably believe that Makoto's greatest enemies have already appeared. The demons, the human kingdoms, corrupt nobles, powerful adventurers, or maybe even the goddess herself. But the truth is that the light novel points towards something very different. Because the biggest challenges Makoto has faced so far may have been nothing more than temporary obstacles. And before we continue, I want to know your opinion. Who do you think will become Makoto's final enemy? The goddess, the demons, or someone who hasn't even appeared in the anime yet? Because when we carefully analyze the story, a very interesting pattern begins to emerge. Makoto wins almost every conflict he encounters. Not because those conflicts are easy, but because none of his current opponents are truly on the same level as him. And that's something the light novel itself gradually begins to acknowledge. At the beginning of the story, Makoto dealt with local problems. Monsters, bandits, adventurers. But as his power grew, the scale of his enemies changed as well. First came conflicts between nations. Then the war between humans and demons. Then problems tied to the very structure of the world itself. And the further the story progresses, the more obvious it becomes that Makoto's current enemies can no longer keep up with his growth. But there is one exception. The goddess. For a long time, many readers believed she would be the final antagonist of the series. After all, she rejected Makoto. She manipulates the humans. She constantly interferes with the world's balance. And she clearly has her own agenda. But there's one important detail. Even as a divine being, the goddess doesn't seem to be the biggest threat. In fact, the light novel increasingly suggests that she may only be part of something much larger. And that becomes clear when we examine Makoto's origins. Because his birth was never ordinary. His parents originally came from that world. They migrated to Earth. And later, Makoto returned. That single fact already makes his existence unique. But as more information is revealed, it becomes increasingly clear that his connection to that world runs much deeper than anyone initially believed. And that's where some of the biggest mysteries in Tsukimichi begin to emerge. Because there are forces watching events unfold. There are entities far older than the current kingdoms. And there are characters whose true roles have yet to be fully revealed. But perhaps the biggest clue lies in Makoto's growth itself. Most Isekai protagonists follow a familiar pattern. They receive power. They become stronger. Eventually, they reach the top. Makoto is different. His growth seems to have no clear explanation. His mana continues to increase. His mastery over his abilities continues to evolve. And many characters in the light novel begin to view him as an anomaly. Something that simply shouldn't exist. And when a story starts treating its protagonist as an anomaly, it often means there's an equally extraordinary force waiting somewhere in the shadows. A force that hasn't entered the stage yet. But there's another important detail that many fans overlook. Throughout the light novel, Makoto isn't just accumulating power. He's accumulating influence. Asura continues to grow. New races join him. His political reach expands. His economic influence expands. His military power expands. And that creates a problem. Because the greater his influence becomes, the stronger the reaction will be from those who see him as a threat. And historically, in Tsukimichi, the greatest conflicts were never caused by strength alone. They emerged when someone threatened the balance of the world. And that's exactly what Makoto is doing, without even realizing it. But the situation becomes even more interesting when we look at the superior dragons. Characters who normally stand above ordinary conflicts. Even they have started showing a growing interest in Makoto. Not simply because of his strength, but because of what he might eventually become. And that distinction is important. Because there's a huge difference between being powerful and becoming a force capable of changing the world's entire structure. Makoto has already surpassed the first stage. Now he's approaching the second. And that suggests something extremely important. Perhaps Makoto's true enemy isn't a king, or an emperor, or the leader of an army, or even the goddess herself. Perhaps it's someone, or something, connected to the deepest mysteries of that universe. Something tied to the origin of the gods, to the world's foundation, and to the reason why someone like Makoto can even exist. Because the further the light novel progresses, the less the story feels like a conflict between humans and demons, and the more it feels like it's building toward a much larger confrontation. A confrontation capable of redefining everything we know about that world. And perhaps that's the biggest clue of all. Makoto's current enemies create obstacles. But none of them truly challenge him. None of them push him to his ultimate limits. None of them feel like the final antagonist of the story. And when a series spends this much time building up a character like Makoto, there's usually a reason. The story is preparing something bigger. Something that hasn't entered the stage yet. Something that may finally explain why Makoto is so different from everyone else. And perhaps that's exactly why many light novel readers believe Makoto's true enemy hasn't appeared yet. Because the current conflicts explain the present. But they don't explain the greatest mysteries of the story. The gods. The world's origins. Makoto's unique existence. And the reason why his growth continues to break every known rule. And when those answers finally arrive, there's a very good chance we'll discover that the goddess was never the final challenge. She was only the first obstacle. And what about you? Who do you think will become Makoto's true final enemy? The goddess? A higher divine being? Or someone the light novel is still hiding from us? Leave your theory in the comments.